The ballroom sparkled with golden lights, crystal chandeliers hanging high above polished marble floors. It was the night of the year, the annual charity ball organized by the city's most powerful businessman, Adrian Cole. To the outside world, Adrian had everything: wealth, success, and influence. But behind his confident smile was a man tired of loneliness. Every year he attended these events surrounded by strangers, people who only cared for his money or his name. This year, he wanted something different. He didn't want to stand on stage with a fake date chosen by his assistants or smile next to someone who only wanted to impress the cameras. He wanted a real partner for the evening, someone who could dance, someone who would stand by his side without pretending. That's why he gave an unusual order. Instead of calling a high-profile guest, he quietly asked a trusted friend to hire a professional dance partner for the night. Someone unknown, someone who would not expect glamour or gifts. When the night finally arrived, Adrian stood near the entrance of the grand hall, his eyes scanning the crowd. Guests in expensive gowns and tailored suits floated through the doors. The music of a live orchestra filled the air, blending with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. But Adrian was not looking at them. He was waiting for her. Then, she appeared. Grace walked into the ballroom in a simple but elegant dress. Compared to the glittering women around her, she looked modest. But her presence carried something different, something soft yet strong. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her eyes lowered as though she didn't want too much attention. Yet the moment she entered, Adrian noticed her. The man who had introduced them whispered, "This is Grace. She'll be your partner tonight." Adrian extended his hand politely. "It's an honor, Grace. Thank you for joining me." Her fingers touched his lightly, and he was struck by the warmth in her touch. Her smile was small, almost shy, but her eyes carried a quiet determination. What Adrian didn't know was that Grace was not just nervous because of the grand ballroom. She carried a secret, one so heavy that every step she took into this glittering world made her heart beat faster. She told herself to stay calm, to play her role, and then leave. One night, that's all she needed to survive. As the orchestra began a slow waltz, Adrian guided her to the floor. At first, her steps were careful, almost hesitant, but soon she moved with grace that surprised him. She wasn't just a hired partner, she was natural, elegant, almost as if she belonged to this world. "You dance well," Adrian said softly as they moved across the floor. Grace lowered her eyes. "Thank you. I had some lessons long ago." Her voice was gentle, but there was something in it, a shadow, a story left untold. Adrian felt a strange pull toward her. Most women he met spoke with pride or expectation. But Grace spoke with quiet strength, as if she had learned life's hardest lessons. Around them, guests began to notice. Whispers floated through the air. "Who is she? She's not from the usual crowd. She looks different, too simple, too humble." Some looked at Grace with envy, others with suspicion. But Adrian didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt at ease in the arms of someone who wasn't pretending. As they danced, he tried to know more about her. "Tell me about yourself, Grace. Do you live in the city?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering away. "Yes. I live quietly. Nothing special." He tilted his head, studying her carefully. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the full truth either. Her words were guarded, like walls built around her heart. Still, the more time he spent with her, the more he wanted to break through those walls. She was mysterious, but not in the way of people who play games. Her mystery felt heavier, like a burden she carried alone. By the end of the first dance, Adrian knew one thing for sure. Grace was not just another hired partner. She was hiding something. And while the guests around them laughed and clapped, Adrian's thoughts grew sharper. Who was this woman who danced with the elegance of royalty, spoke with the humility of a servant, and carried sadness in her smile? The night had only begun, but Adrian felt a strange certainty deep inside him. This was no ordinary evening. This woman would change something in his life, something he had never expected. And Grace, as she looked at him with quiet eyes, prayed that her secret would not come out tonight. Because if it did, everything she had worked so hard to protect would shatter. The music swelled, the crowd applauded, and their dance continued. But beneath the golden lights and elegant smiles, a dangerous truth remained hidden, waiting to unfold. The music slowed, and the first dance came to an end. Guests clapped politely, but Adrian barely noticed them. His focus was still on Grace. She stepped back gently, lowering her eyes as though she wanted to disappear into the crowd. Yet the very way she carried herself made her impossible to ignore. "Shall we sit?" Adrian asked softly. Grace nodded. They walked to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from curious eyes. A waiter brought them glasses of wine, but Grace only touched hers politely without drinking. Adrian noticed. "You don't drink?" he asked. "Not often," Grace replied quickly, almost too quickly. Then she added, "I need to keep a clear head. Life doesn't give me the chance to relax much." Her words struck him. Most women he knew enjoyed every chance to drink, laugh, and show off. But Grace was different, practical, controlled, almost cautious. Adrian leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You intrigue me, Grace. You move like someone who's spent years in ballrooms, yet you act like you don't belong here. Which one is true?" Grace's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes didn't match it. "Maybe both. Maybe neither." Her answer was clever, but it left him even more curious. Who was she? The evening continued, and Adrian had to mingle with other guests. Grace followed, as expected, but she didn't try to shine in the spotlight. She stayed quiet, graceful, almost invisible, except to Adrian. He noticed how carefully she watched people, how her eyes lingered on conversations, how she seemed to study everyone in the room. At one point, an older woman approached Adrian, greeting him with false sweetness. She gave Grace a sharp look, the kind that judged without words. "And who might this be?" the woman asked, her tone dripping with curiosity. "This is Grace," Adrian replied firmly. "My partner for the evening." The woman's eyebrows lifted. "Ah, I see." She didn't see at all, but her stare carried both suspicion and disdain. Grace smiled politely, not reacting to the insult hidden in those words. But Adrian noticed the way her hands tightened slightly around her clutch. She wasn't used to this world anymore, and it made her uncomfortable. Later, when they had a moment alone again, Adrian said, "You handled that very well." Grace looked at him, her eyes soft but guarded. "I've learned not to let words break me. People often judge what they don't understand." There it was again, that quiet strength, that weight of experience. She spoke like someone who had fought battles no one could see. Adrian found himself leaning closer. "You're not like anyone I've ever met at these events. You don't flatter me. You don't chase attention. You carry yourself like someone who's lived a different life. I want to know more." Grace shook her head gently. "Sometimes, knowing more only brings trouble." Her words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Adrian didn't press further, but inside, his curiosity burned brighter. As the night went on, the orchestra played another waltz, and Adrian invited Grace back to the floor. This time, her movements were more relaxed, more natural, as though she was slowly letting down her guard. "Why did you agree to come tonight?" Adrian asked as they danced. Grace hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the chandelier above them before meeting his. "Because sometimes people need money more than pride," she said softly. Adrian's chest tightened. There was honesty in her words, painful honesty. She wasn't here for fun or dreams, she was here out of necessity. But there was more, he was sure of it. The way she carried herself, the way she spoke, it wasn't just about money. Grace was hiding something deeper. When the song ended, Adrian guided her back to their table. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of laughter from across the room. Then, Grace spoke in a voice so low only he could hear. "Adrian, sometimes people wear masks, not to deceive, but to survive. The words struck him harder than anything else she had said that night. He wanted to ask what she meant, but she quickly turned her gaze toward the dance floor, as if the moment had never happened. Adrian leaned back, his mind racing. This woman was no ordinary partner. She was a mystery, wrapped in elegance and silence. And the more he tried to understand her, the more he realized she was hiding a secret so heavy that even her smiles could not cover it. What was she protecting? What pain lived behind her eyes? The night was far from over, but Adrian knew one thing with certainty. Grace was not in his life by accident. She was here for a reason. And that reason would change everything. The ballroom glowed brighter as the night went on, laughter echoing between the marble pillars. But Adrian's attention never left Grace. She stood by his side quietly, her eyes scanning the room as though searching for something, or perhaps avoiding someone. Adrian noticed. She wasn't nervous like a newcomer. No, her eyes moved differently, like someone who knew how to measure danger, someone who was used to watching shadows. At one point, Adrian stepped away to greet a group of businessmen. Grace remained near the edge of the dance floor, standing tall though she looked out of place among the jeweled gowns and diamond necklaces. She touched her clutch bag as if it carried something important, something she needed close at all times. While Adrian was caught in conversation, a man in his late 50s approached Grace. His suit was sharp, his smile sharper. He bowed slightly, but his eyes glinted with recognition. "Well, well," he whispered, leaning close. "I didn't expect to see you here." Grace froze. Her breath caught in her throat, but she quickly covered it with a polite smile. "I think you're mistaken, sir," she replied softly. The man chuckled under his breath. "Mistaken? No, I never forget a face. Especially not one that once caused such a noise." Her fingers tightened on her clutch. "You're confusing me with someone else." Before the man could continue, Adrian returned. His presence was calm but firm, and the older man straightened immediately. "Mr. Cole," he greeted smoothly, pretending nothing had happened. "Enjoying the evening?" "As much as one can," Adrian replied coldly. His sharp eyes moved between the man and Grace. He noticed the way her shoulders tensed, the way her lips pressed together. When the man walked away, Adrian turned to her. "Do you know him?" Grace forced a smile. "No. Just another stranger." But Adrian knew she was lying. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. Later in the evening, while Adrian spoke to a group of investors, Grace slipped quietly toward the balcony. The cool night air brushed against her skin as she stepped outside, away from the noise and judgmental stares. She pulled out her phone, her hands trembling slightly, and dialed a number. "Are you safe?" A woman's voice answered quickly on the other end. "Yes," Grace whispered, glancing over her shoulder to make sure no one had followed. "But someone recognized me. It's dangerous here. I don't know how long I can keep this up." "You have to stay strong," the voice replied. "For your child. Don't let them see fear." Grace closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "I'm trying. But if Adrian finds out..." She stopped suddenly, hearing footsteps behind her. She quickly ended the call and slipped her phone back into her clutch. It was Adrian. He stood in the doorway, watching her. His expression was calm, but his eyes searched hers like he was piecing together a puzzle. "You looked troubled," he said softly. Grace forced another small smile. "I just needed some air. That's all." Adrian stepped closer, his voice low. "That man earlier, he knew you. I could see it. And now you're out here making secret calls. Grace, what are you hiding?" Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to tell him the truth, but fear locked her lips. If she trusted him too soon, everything could fall apart. "I'm not hiding anything," she said carefully. "But sometimes, the past follows us, even when we don't want it to." Adrian studied her for a long moment. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to reach into her silence and pull out the truth. But he also knew pushing her too hard would only drive her away. "Whoever you were before doesn't matter to me," he said finally. "But I want you to know, you don't have to carry it alone." Grace turned her head, hiding the tears forming in her eyes. She wasn't ready to reveal the secret. Not yet. Inside the ballroom, the music shifted into a livelier rhythm, pulling guests back to the dance floor. Adrian offered his hand again, his expression soft. "Shall we go back?" Grace looked at his hand, then at his steady eyes. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. But as they returned inside, Grace's mind was not on the dance. It was on the shadows creeping closer, on the man who had recognized her, on the secret she had buried so deeply. A secret she knew would not stay hidden much longer. The ballroom was alive with laughter and music, but for Adrian and Grace, the night felt heavier than the glittering lights above them. Adrian guided her back to their table, but his thoughts lingered on what he had seen, her tense reaction to the man, her secret phone call on the balcony. Grace sat quietly, her fingers brushing the edge of her clutch. She looked calm on the outside, but inside her heart raced. She prayed Adrian wouldn't press her again, not here, not now. But fate had other plans. As Adrian excused himself to speak with a guest, Grace decided to step away for a moment. She found a quiet corridor leading toward the side of the ballroom. She opened her clutch and checked inside, making sure everything was still there. Her phone, her child's photo, and a stack of folded papers. Her hands trembled as she touched the documents, reminders of the life she had left behind. She didn't notice Adrian watching from a distance. When she returned to the ballroom, Adrian gently pulled her aside. "Grace," he said in a low voice, "I don't mean to invade your privacy. But earlier, when you left your bag on the chair, it fell open. I saw something." Grace froze. "What did you see?" "Medical bills," Adrian answered carefully. "And a letter with a company name I know very well. Why would you carry something like that? What does it mean?" Grace's breath caught. She looked away, fighting to control her emotions. "You shouldn't have looked." "I didn't mean to," Adrian said, his voice steady. "But it's clear you're carrying more than just memories. Grace, you don't have to tell me everything, but please, don't lie to me." She turned to him then, her eyes shimmering with tears she tried to hide. For a long moment, she said nothing. The music and voices around them faded until it felt like the whole room disappeared. Finally, she whispered, "Those bills, they're for my son." Adrian blinked in surprise. "You have a child?" Grace nodded, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes. He's my whole world. He's sick, and I'm doing everything I can to help him. That's why I took this job tonight. I needed the money." Adrian felt a pang in his chest. Suddenly, her quiet strength, her cautious behavior, all of it made sense. She wasn't just being mysterious, she was protecting someone she loved more than anything. But he still sensed she was hiding more. "The letter," Adrian said softly. "The company name on it, it belongs to one of my biggest rivals. Why would their name be on your papers?" Grace's eyes darkened. She gripped her clutch tightly, her knuckles pale. "That's part of the story I can't tell you. Not yet." "Grace," Adrian urged, his voice gentle. "You can trust me." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "No. If you knew everything, you might not want me here. You might see me as trouble." Adrian studied her carefully. "Grace, if there's danger, I need to know. If someone is after you." Her eyes widened, and she quickly placed a hand on his arm to silence him. "Not here. Please. Too many ears, too many eyes. If people find out who I really am, everything will fall apart." The desperation in her voice stopped him from pressing further. Adrian nodded slowly, realizing he had to wait until she was ready. Later that night, when the ball began to quiet down and guests started leaving, Adrian walked Grace to his car. The city lights shimmered in the distance, and the night air was cool. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Grace spoke in a voice so fragile it almost broke him. "Adrian, I didn't come here tonight just to dance. I came because I had no choice. My son needs me. And the people connected to that company, they're the reason I had to run." Adrian's chest tightened. Her words were pieces of a puzzle, fragments of a truth she was too afraid to speak fully. But one thing was clear: Grace was not just a single mother struggling for money. She was a woman running from powerful enemies, enemies Adrian himself knew too well. He looked at her then, not as a dance partner, not as a mystery, but as a mother fighting for her child. And in that moment, he silently promised himself that no matter what her secret was, he would protect her. But deep down, he knew the truth would come out soon. And when it did, it would change everything. The night after the charity ball, Adrian could not sleep. He kept replaying Grace's words in his mind. "The people connected to that company, they're the reason I had to run." She had revealed only pieces, yet those pieces were enough to stir his curiosity and concern. He wanted to believe her, but he also knew she was holding back something huge. The next day, Adrian sat in his office, staring at the letter he had seen in Grace's bag. The company name stamped on it belonged to the Harrington Group, a ruthless business empire run by men Adrian had battled in the boardroom for years. If Grace was connected to them, her secret was far bigger than unpaid bills and a sick child. That evening, he called Grace and invited her to meet him in a quiet cafe away from the city lights. She arrived in a plain coat, her hair tied back simply, looking less like the elegant woman who had stunned the ballroom and more like a mother carrying the weight of the world. "You shouldn't have asked me here," she said softly as she sat down. "It's dangerous." "Dangerous for who?" Adrian asked. "You. Or me?" She sighed, her eyes dropping to the table. "Both." Adrian leaned forward. "Grace, I want to help you. But I can't do that if you keep running from the truth. Tell me what's really happening." For a long moment, she was silent. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup. Then, finally, she spoke. "Years ago, I wasn't just a single mother trying to survive. I was married." Her voice was steady but filled with pain. "I married into the Harrington family." Adrian's eyes widened. You were part of them?" Grace nodded slowly. "At first, I believed their wealth and power could give me a safe life. But soon I saw the truth. Their empire wasn't built on honesty or hard work. It was built on lies, corruption, and betrayal. I discovered things I wasn't supposed to know. Deals that destroyed people's lives. Secrets that could ruin them if exposed." Adrian listened closely, every word cutting deeper into the mystery. "When I became pregnant," Grace continued, her voice shaking slightly, "I thought it would change everything. I thought maybe they'd soften, maybe they'd care. But instead, it made things worse. I realized I couldn't raise my child in that world. So I left." Adrian frowned. "They just let you go?" "No," Grace whispered, her eyes filling with fear. "They tried to stop me. I had to disappear. Change my name. Start over with nothing. Since then, I've been hiding, working small jobs, doing whatever I can to keep my son safe." Adrian's chest tightened. The woman sitting across from him was not just a struggling mother. She was someone who had risked everything to escape a powerful, dangerous family. "You've been living a double life," he said quietly. "Yes," she admitted. "By day, I'm just Grace, a single mom no one notices. But in reality, I carry knowledge that could destroy men like the Harringtons. And they know it. That's why they're still watching me. That's why I was so afraid at the ball. When that man recognized me." She broke off, her voice trembling. "It means they're closer than I thought." Adrian leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Grace, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because," she said, her eyes locking with his, "the closer you are to me, the more danger you're in. And I couldn't bear the thought of someone else getting hurt because of me." Adrian sat back, his mind racing. All the pieces were finally coming together. Grace wasn't just a dance partner. She wasn't even just a single mother. She was a woman who had walked away from an empire of corruption, and had been hunted ever since. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and raw. Then Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. "Grace, listen to me. I don't care what you've been through or what you're hiding. You don't have to fight this alone anymore." Tears slipped down her cheeks, though she quickly wiped them away. "You don't understand, Adrian. If the Harringtons find out I've spoken to you, they'll see you as an enemy too. They'll ruin everything you've built." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Let them try." Grace shook her head. "You don't know how ruthless they are." "Then it's time someone stood up to them," Adrian said firmly. "And I'm not afraid." Grace looked at him, torn between hope and fear. For years she had carried her burden alone, living two lives, one in the light, one in the shadows. Now, for the first time, someone was offering to share it with her. But deep inside, she knew the cost. Secrets this big never stayed buried forever. And once the Harringtons realized Adrian was on her side, both their lives would be thrown into a storm they might not escape. The city's grand ballroom was alive once more, filled with powerful guests dressed in silk and diamonds. Another charity event, another stage for the rich to display their wealth. But for Adrian, tonight was different. Tonight, he was not simply attending another gala. Tonight, he stood beside Grace, not as an employer and his hired partner, but as a man determined to protect her. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her dress. She had agreed to attend because Adrian insisted it was the only way to face her past. "If you keep running," he had told her, "they'll always find you. But if you stand tall, they'll know you're not afraid anymore." Still, her heart pounded. She knew the Harringtons would be here. She knew their eyes would find her, and when they did, her carefully built double life would shatter. As Adrian led her onto the dance floor, whispers immediately spread through the crowd. People recognized her. Some gasped, some smirked, some whispered names she hadn't heard in years. Grace lifted her chin, her steps graceful despite the storm inside her. Halfway through the dance, the music seemed to dim when a tall, stern man stepped forward. His face was sharp, his eyes cold, Mr. Harrington himself. The crowd parted as he approached Adrian and Grace. "Well," he said, his voice smooth but laced with venom. "Look who we have here. The runaway." Grace froze, her body tightening. But Adrian pulled her closer, keeping his arms steady around her. "You should watch your words," Adrian said calmly. Harrington's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who she really is, Cole? Do you know the scandal she left behind? She's not some innocent woman. She's a thief. A liar. She took something that didn't belong to her." The crowd buzzed with murmurs, curious eyes turning toward Grace. She felt the weight of judgment pressing down again, the same weight that had once crushed her years ago. Her lips parted, her voice trembling. "That's not true." Harrington sneered. "Then tell them. Tell them why you ran." Grace's chest rose and fell quickly. This was it, the moment she had feared for so long. The secret she had tried to bury could no longer stay hidden. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, her voice steady. "I ran because I discovered the truth," she said loudly enough for the ballroom to hear. "Your empire isn't built on success, it's built on corruption. I found the documents. I saw the deals. You were destroying lives for profit, and you thought no one would ever dare to speak against you. I ran, not because I was guilty, but because I refused to raise my child in your poisoned world." Gasps spread through the room. Some faces turned pale, others turned away in shame, but Harrington's face darkened with fury. "You foolish woman," he spat. "Do you think anyone will believe you?" Adrian stepped forward, his voice sharp and clear. "They will believe her, because I do. And I have enough influence to make sure her story is heard." The crowd grew louder, the tension rising. For a moment, Harrington seemed ready to lash out, but the weight of so many eyes forced him to step back. His glare burned with silent promises of revenge, but he said nothing more. With a final cold glance, he turned and disappeared into the crowd. Grace stood frozen, her heart racing, her secret no longer hidden. For the first time in years, she felt both fear and freedom. Fear, because the Harringtons would not stop. Freedom, because she no longer had to pretend. Adrian turned to her, his eyes steady. "You were brave tonight. Braver than anyone I've ever known." Tears welled in her eyes. "You don't understand, Adrian. By standing with me, you've made yourself their enemy too." "I don't care," he said firmly. "I told you, I'm not afraid. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." The orchestra, unaware of the storm that had just passed, began to play again. Adrian offered his hand. For a moment, Grace hesitated, then placed her hand in his. As they moved across the floor, the whispers slowly faded, replaced by the soft rhythm of the waltz. For the first time, Grace danced not as a woman hiding in the shadows, but as a woman who had spoken her truth. Adrian's gaze never left hers. In his eyes, she saw something she had not felt in years: safety, trust, and perhaps, hope for a new beginning. The Harringtons would not give up easily. She knew storms still waited ahead. But as she rested her hand against Adrian's shoulder, she realized she no longer had to face them alone. And in that moment, beneath the glittering lights of the ballroom, Grace felt a truth even stronger than fear. Sometimes, the greatest dance of all is not with steps, but with courage.